Peter Trotman, welcome again to Talking Pest Management. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, Dan. And yourself?
Pretty good, thank you. Pete, let's start with the first one. I think a lot of people will be interested in hearing more about Pest Pulse developed in the past 1 year that we didn't catch up, and especially how COVID hit you.
Yeah, I suppose COVID's an interesting one, really. And although, there's been a lot of tragedy out there in the world with COVID, I think for me personally, it's been a very interesting time because it's allowed me to get out in the field more, and I'll talk about that later. But I suppose there's been a lot of businesses that have had to adapt to remote working, whereas in Pest Pulse, because our developers work abroad, we've got people in Brazil, in Germany, in Dublin, in Portugal, in Ireland, everywhere. We are used to working remotely.
Yeah.
So I suppose for us, it's been a bit of BAU, and we work remotely with our supply partners and our self-delivery. So for us, it hasn't been that much of a dynamic change in regards to COVID. Mm-hmm. And I think that shows that the benefit of if you are able to work remotely in times of adversity, you don't have to adapt quite so much.
Yeah, true. I mean, how could you ever get the staff that you are having, developers from Brazil, etc. You mentioned, with having a fixed office in Dublin that everybody needs to visit every day. Yeah, totally agree. So did you have doubts that pest control would be deemed to being a key service in the beginning, or was that clear for you from the very start?
I don't know if it was clear because I didn't really understand our government's priorities at that particular stage. But I thought it would be one of the first services that people would demand become an essential service, and we could gain the classification of key workers. So I was glad to see that came in fairly early in the process after the initial lockdown. So that helped our clients and us for sure.
Yeah. So can you help us with a little bit of a recap? The last 12 months, I think now 2.5 years or something for Pest Pulse. So what happened? What's new with you guys?
Well, I suppose we've been developing our processes and our supply and our implementation of smart technology, and I think that sort of falls into two elements really. Yes, we're developing more smart devices. We have a new batch coming in now, 1,500 units at the end of this month. So we've got a broader range of smart units, and we're getting a higher quantity. And that gives us more data as we put those out into the field. So I think that's one good thing. But I think we're also learning how to start to use those in an IPM program. Whereas before, we knew smart worked. We knew how to put it in a corner X, Y, and Z, or in a roof forward. We knew how to connect that signal up, and we knew we got an alert or a bit of information. But those were lots of different parts of the puzzle, really, and it's really fitting those together and gaining intelligence and information on that. And then how to apply that to gain a cost advantage, how to apply that to reduce client risk. So that cost advantage and that reduction of client risk, I think, is something that we've been focusing on, both in regards to development in our portals. The clients can see that in regards of communication with the clients, automated communication and updated reports, and working with the guys in the field so they understand really how that piece of intelligence becomes part of their control program.
Data is the new gold. A lot of people always claim. Is it the same for you? Do you see the same pest control? I mean, speaking about people the first time about digital devices, smart, people are oftentimes wondering whether we cannot forecast rodent situations, etc. So things that sound today still very fancy, albeit we already had a couple of years of smart. So what are your thoughts on data and what does it do at Pest Pulse?
Yeah. Predictive, using data to predict activities is a very interesting one. And I think as an industry, we're some time away from that to make any real sense of that. We certainly do see trends in areas. We certainly do see trends in seasonality with the data. But I don't think that's telling us anything more than we pretty much knew as pest controllers. I think that we're going to need more of that on a more extensive basis to get to that. But will we? Absolutely. I think we will get to that. And I think it's interesting in areas where we work intensively, like Soho in London, where we are finding that there are peaks in activity around communal areas, in around zones. So some way away from that, yes, making real use of that, but it's interesting to watch it and see how that develops.
Agreed. So one thing you told me earlier before we started to record the interview, you said you've been in the field lately a lot. So can you tell us how that change appeared to happen, and what did you see?
Sure. Okay. So one of my certain passions is to work out there with technicians and by myself in the field. And I think COVID was very interesting because it allowed you to go into premises where you could focus on rodent control, focus on pest control without any real disturbance of clients and people, clients and customers, because the places were empty. Yeah. So you had this clear train of thought when you were in there without any distractions. And throughout the COVID period, although there was a couple of weeks of really, the customers shutting up shop completely to begin with, as we worked with our clients and they opened those sites up for us to get in, I was spending about 3, sometimes 4 days a week in London, going around multiple premises. Observing what was happening, what benefit did Smart give, what sites that just had standard traps in and baits, how did that compare? So I think the key observations were interesting around rodent behaviour. Things like mice. Now, we use lots of run-through traps for mice. Yeah. So, and we know with double run-through traps, it was more commonplace for a mouse to be caught on the second trap from the entrance. And that means that they're running there at speed, jumping over the first one, landing in the second one. Yeah. And that was more commonplace than landing on the first one. Whereas about halfway through COVID, after about 4 weeks, we found that they were being caught on the first trap.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so it's more commonplace being caught on the first trap. Now, what did that tell you? It means that actually, because there were so many humans going about, the mice were starting to go slow. Yeah, so,
interesting.
Yeah, so they're going towards these traps, and they were entering them not in a scurrying motion. Yeah, so they were entering them at a slower speed. And also we were catching more on what I call baffle traps, of boxes where they had to maneuver through a maze to get to the trap. So they weren't as successful as run-throughs, but we were catching more on those than we would normally catch. So I think the rodent behaviour changed. It was really interesting. Certainly where baits were used, there's a higher uptake of bait because there's less food competition, which again, we expected that to happen. Rats certainly increased greatly. We're able to control mice quickly. So the level of mouse activity inside significantly reduced, and we've probably got the lowest level I think we've ever seen inside premises. Whereas rats had certainly increased. They would be getting more aggressive, gnawing their way through doors, getting into buildings, gnawing their way into bins. And I think the lack of street food for rats, they're more dependent on street food, made them come into a lot more premise. So more rats, less mice in summer.
I think what a lot of people don't know because they don't see it is that nights, especially, you mentioned Soho, like areas like Soho, rats live in the canals and the sewage system, obviously, or not all of them, but a lot of them live there. And in the nighttime, they use it as a hub, living inside the sewage, leaving the sewage, eating outside in the nighttime when humans are asleep and going back in. Is that something that gotten visible? Is that something that pest controllers are, especially in these downtown areas, are used to, or is that something you've seen a lot?
I don't know if I saw any relationship to sewerage systems change than was pre-COVID at all. As I say, all I really saw was that there were more rats searching a wider range for less food, which made them more aggressive in their pattern to gain entry to buildings or yards or bins. The amount of lids on plastic bins that I've seen chewed through for rats to get into. Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know, the Euro bins, the large metal ones with the rubber bungs, the amount of rats that just gnawed straight through to those was incredible. But I also saw, I was at one premise last week, and that had a yard area with bins, a waste yard, and that had 13 traps in there. A customer that was concerned about their rat infestation asked me to come in. It wasn't a site that we serviced, but the other contractor put 13 traps in there, which was reasonable quantity, and they got them in okay areas. But out of those traps, there was 2 rats in those traps. One was probably about 3 months old, and the other about a month old. There were 2 traps that were set ready to kill. And 9 other traps had all been knocked by rodents. Now, I don't think they'd particularly been knocked by humans, because there wasn't humans walking around there. And so I said to the client, you know, what you've got here is, you think you're protected because you've got all these stations and traps around, but 83% of your traps are useless. They've either got a rat in or they've been knocked off, and you don't know about that. And I think that's interesting to see that clients think they're protected by having boxes about, but unless you get some intelligence for those boxes, or you understand whether they're armed or whether there's rodents going through them, they're pretty useless. So I think in that circumstance, having such a high number of boxes that are ineffective really helps the case for remote monitoring.
I remember back in the days when we met the first time, we talked about these maze boxes or dome boxes, where with the very tight openings, and you said something like, you can probably say better, you need to stick to really convince them to get in there, right? Yeah,
you need to push them in there with a stick. That's right. Yes. So certainly, you know, when you're on site and you can watch mice move, and you put different boxes down, where you have a box with a larger opening allowed to enter at speed, absolutely, you will get more ingress. Where you have traps where they haven't got to change the texture of the surface they walk on so much to get into that trap, or you put an exposed trap and not a trap in a box, you will absolutely get higher efficacy on that particular trap. So you're disturbing their not disturbing their natural movement is always key to get great efficacy on the traps, we find.
Yeah. Earlier, before we start to record, you said that a crucial element is you cannot replace. Everybody talks about smart here and there in digital traps and various different models, and you said you cannot replace a regular pest control box, be bait, trap, or monitoring latent, with a smart box. And I think a lot of people and pest managers around the world that are thinking and heard about smart and thinking about it, and you're executing it so much. So can you share a little bit about what is the key? Not just replacing, but what do you do, and how does it work out for you?
Yeah, so I think, you know, about 2 years ago or so, I said I think we're on a 5-year journey with smart. And, you know, here we are in year 2, where a lot of manufacturers have developed smart technology. It's got easier to use, it's got easier to implement, it's got easier to connect to the cloud or however you connect it. There's a greater range, there's much better videos online, how to connect these things. So giving a guy a box of smart and getting them into site and putting those smarts is much easier than it was a couple of years ago. So we'll tick that box now. But I think the real key about getting smart out there more as business as usual is going to be down to 2 things. One, the commercial element, and that is, is smart more expensive than conventional? Yeah. And costs have come down, and time on site to set up a site has come down. So those two things now weigh equally with the labour savings. So smart is not more expensive than conventional pest control in most situations. But to reinforce that statement, you really need to understand how to implement smart. And I think we as Pest Pulse are still learning the best way to do that. How many smart devices do we put down in the site to complement rather than replace conventional means of control? So smart isn't a replacement to pest control. It is a complement to it, where we can put smart in really high risk areas. We can put smart in areas that are really difficult to get into. We can put smart in areas where technicians don't want to service. If you look at the distribution tray, if you look at the distribution warehouses, the amount of automated picking aisles now become.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and you can only get access to those once every 6 weeks when there's a maintenance shutdown. Yeah. And you can argue to get into them all the time if you want, but they are not going to shut down for pest control. You know, they're going to say you've got a window 3 o'clock on Sunday morning to get in. So I think the industry, and we're still on a bit of a discovery to say we know smart's good, but we don't fully understand how to use it yet, both from a technician's perspective when it's on site, or as a business owner on how many and exactly where to put them. We know it's good, but we don't know quite how good. And I think, you know, the industry bodies like the BPCA and others should really start to play a bit of an assisting role in that, because I don't think they dedicate any task force or any resource to say, how should smart fit in an IPM and what recommendations are we going to give further than that? So I think that's something, you know, for the next 2 years that we will work.
Have you, CEPA, or European Association, has released an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, which has a strong focus on IPM. Have you guys read it already?
About 11 o'clock last night, I read it actually. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, I thought you'd ask me on this course. I thought I'd best. Okay. Yeah, did my homework slightly. Yeah.
Wow.
I think the whole element of trying to professionalise what we do, and gain recognition. I think an important part of the theme of that was gaining recognition for how professional pest control is, how trained pest control technicians have got to be, and how that should be valued in the marketplace. And, you know, I really think we work with a number of customers, pub groups, retail outlets, manufacturing, that really are valuing pest control technician skill sets, and we're able therefore to reward technicians better than we were able to do before, and I think that's really important for us as an industry to continue along those lines and really promote that. So I think the CEPA, in regards of its MOU, in regards of recognition of the professionalism and steering the industry in the way to go, if steering is the right word, is the right thing to do. Fully supportive.
Well, super. Yeah, sounds good. I think it's quite a cool tool to show what we're up to, what the value of our service is. And I think, and this would be my next question, that during COVID, where a lot of various businesses and areas filed bankruptcy or have seen how fragile they are being financed or venture backed so much, the society is basically, it brought it to the surface which businesses are key or essential. And I think pest control is, after the manufacturing, farm to fork, after the manufacturing of food for humans and pharmaceuticals, I think pest control is somewhere in the chain there, delivering some valuable service. So thank you for the feedback. I personally do think it's valuable too. My next question would be, do you think a lot of pest controllers are going to suffer within the next 6, 12 or 24 months because of what happened? I mean, imagine you have a lot of pubs, restaurants, hotels. Do you think only these people, or some people that have some sort of financial mechanisms in place that don't work anymore? What is your take on that?
Well, it's interesting. I was speaking to a city investor yesterday on the phone, which I've done some previous work for.
Mm.
And he was looking at the impact of COVID on the pest control industry. And he has a big portfolio of investment. Now, I think two things are going to happen. Yes, a lot of the clients are going to suffer. A lot of our clients are going to suffer and are suffering at the moment. So they haven't got the available cash to spend on any activities.
Yeah.
I still think from what I see, they're still willing to spend it on pest control because they don't have a lot of choice to do that. And therefore, as an industry, we are reasonably robust through times of adversity. But what I think is going to happen is the people that are going to win out of that are the ones that can dynamically change at a faster pace, can work more remotely, both in regards of not utilising so much expensive labour to go to site, but also can work as a business remotely. So I think those two things are going to come into play. I think that the labour market where the pest control industry can attract a better level of technician may well help, because there will be more choice in the labour market. And I think maybe younger people who is slightly harder to attract in our unusual industry. It's not of industries to join when you're young, for sure, may look at pest control now as a bit more of a robust and less boom and bust type industry that they can develop a career in. And I hope that's what your message gets out there. I don't know how to get that out there. You know, that's a really hard one, but I think certainly there will be better opportunity to train a higher level of professional people, and I hope they start to come from a younger generation.
And I think it's quite it could be very true. The likes of that becoming true are, in my eyes at least, pretty high. I just spoke to Generation Z person in my family yesterday, and they are very aware of what's happening. We talked about startup because he's very business interested, and he said that all of this nature, you know, building up a company in 5 years, exiting, etc., wasn't really his business, and neither of his friends, and he was looking at something more solid. So maybe, Pete, you're right, yeah. So last but not least, something that people always ask me in the topic of smart is, what tools do we use with smart? Do we use trap X, trap Y? Do we use the box latent? Do we use just a motion trigger, whatever? Do we use bait? What bait do we use? Do we use non-toxic bait? You know, all these various tools available in combination with smart, and that's what people, I think, having issues with. We see a lot of smart traps, obviously. You know, Rentica has a very clever CO2 solution. Many things exist. So what is your take on these tools?
Well, I think you've got to keep it reasonably simple, and we have a great variety of tools. So I think, you know, we use smart to say, here's a problem, here's probably the quantity of the problem, and it hones down the area of the problem within a site. So we get that intelligence from smart, and then it's either how is that complemented on a proactive basis. Yeah, so the answer to that is primarily non-smart traps rather than poisons, especially in urban centres. But as a control measure, once you get that indication of rodent movement, then baits certainly still have a part to play. So normally we would go down the lines of, to complement smart traps, you put non-smart traps. If you're going to use rodenticide, contact gels, contact tends to be far more effective than any edible baits. But there's a skill set in putting those contact gels down.
Absolutely.
And that's great, because that challenges the technician to really think about where the rodent is. Whereas if you're going to put down bait, you sort of know it's going to be in this area, and then you put down some bait. But I think the use of contact gel challenges the technician to get down on their hands and knees more, to get underneath units, to investigate into cupboards and to roof voids. So we would then usually go to our tool chest of rodent control elements and pick some form of contact. And then I suppose the last resort there is to utilise rodenticides. And I'm not anti-rodenticide at all, and I'll absolutely use them where they're effective. But we have to accept that A, there is a higher level of resistance, chemical resistance. B, there is a higher level of behavioural resistance to consuming edible rodenticides. And therefore, the amount of times that you can use these to wholly control rodent activity in urban areas is becoming limited now.
Yeah. So do you think that, I mean, a lot of people talk about this, do you think the next 5, 10, 20 years we're not seeing any form of rodenticides anymore or anticoagulants?
Well, legislation will have its part to play in that, and that may be different in different parts of the world, but I can see it being driven by the efficacy of the use of rodenticides. Is one of the ways that we will see less because they are less effective. When the legislation comes over that and starts to say, listen, world, there is a truly viable alternative now where we haven't got to use rodenticides, whereas I don't think we could say that 10 years ago as an industry or as a business. But can we maintain effective rodent control without rodenticides? Personally, I believe with a lot of effort we can today. Is that the right thing to do? I think we're a little bit away from that yet, but I think that will come at some stage. You're probably a bit more in tune with that, Daniel, than I am in regards of the way that legislation's going. But, it's obvious to say that today there are less rodenticides that work, that are less efficient than there were 5, 10 years ago.
Yeah. In the end, from so many pest controls around the world, I think the most important thing that plays into this is we need tools, and we ourselves need to decide as professionals what tools we want to use. So I think IPM is something that we talk about since the 90s, since it brought into existence. I just had an interview with Bobby Corrigan, and Bobby's the IPM guy, being based in New York, obviously, and with rats and harborages and the sewage system there. And I think what we really didn't do, if everybody, examines themselves, basically, if they did a proper IPM before actually applying any sort of biological, physical, or chemical control, we might have worked at 70-80% IPM, whereas we could have maybe reached 100. And what I found really interesting is that in Holland, which is always a funny, innovative country that I like to interview people from, in Holland, they changed the law a little bit, and the guidelines they have towards to not being able to lay down a rodenticide, for instance, when IPM has not yet been brought forward at 100%. And then there's been a case study from one of the larger companies there, and they have worked on farms especially. And I mean, you and I know when there is a problem, a farm is definitely a bigger one than maybe a supermarket or a warehouse. So most of the times, at least. So they asked the farmers to actually put up walls to increase the building structure, and the farmers said, "Look, it's too expensive. We won't do it." And then they just simply answered, "Okay, we cannot by law then apply any form of proactive or active pest control measurements." And it went front and back, but with the law behind them, the farmers then, after a while of discussion, went back and installed a new wall or such. And I think that would be a great help for pest controllers to put a little bit of responsibility on the side of the clients as well, because we all would probably agree if our clients spent a little bit more budget on keeping their sites hygiene very high and their building structure very high, that the control we do, pest management is now called pest control most of the times, will be decreased. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think IPM has always been with us. Before the word IPM was invented, it's there's always been a program where you bring in proofing, hygiene, and control practices. I think that's a great example in the way that Holland have done it. If they have said, listen, you absolutely got to make sure you've done everything, and rodenticide should be a last resort rather than your first resort, because it's sort of cheap and semi-effective. That would be a great way to go. But I think even without legislation, I think some clients have gone down that line. I've got a great example of one of our commercial contracts that we took on in January. They were having almost 2,000 routines to their sites. Basically, they were going down the policy of the more rodents they had on a site, the more routines will be done by the pest controller, and that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So and they're almost accepting that many sites were having continued levels of activity. So we went in there with a different approach. We said, let's use some intelligence, let's get some facts, and let's see really what's happening to your estate. Now, cut a long story short, we've taken those routines down from 2,000 to their estate down to just over 1,000 in less than 4 months. We've taken their infestation levels down from just about 40% down to less than 6%. So you've got this situation where a client was being advised just to do more of the same, which wasn't working, and increase the costs. And you could just imagine that the cost savings of those 1,000 routines in regards of transport and everything, they haven't spent less. In fact, they spent a little bit more, but they've spent it on proofing and proactive measures. And they've seen that they've gone to the marketplace, found something that's slightly different, taken a different approach, used data, used intelligence, used facts to go and look at their sites. And now they're just amazed because they didn't think this was actually possible. Within 4 months, they're in the best situation that they've ever been in. So I think if it's approached the right way, and you do have to get the right client, you can get them on board to actually support that regardless of legislation. But certainly legislation would help to those clients that maybe need a bit more of a nudge down the IPM route.
Yeah, agreed. Hey, super, Pete. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being such a pioneer in digital and smart and everything that you do. And all the best to Pest Pulse and you managing the company. And I would love to revisit that again in the next 6 to 12 months. So see you soon.
Sure, that's great. All the best. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.